Hi everyone, Janine here. Thought I'd start again with all the stuff I'm going to use in the video today. So I have distress oxide inks in antique linen, gathered twigs, fossilized amber, tumbled glass and broken china. And I'm going to create a Flintstones inspired scene. And I'm going to use the Mama Elephant, Me and My Dinosaur stamp set to create this little Flintstone scene. I also have the not Mama Elephant, MFT's Hills and Drifts stencil, which I'm going to use just to create a backdrop for these guys. I'm also using Lawn Fawn's April Showers for the clouds. I only used the little cloud in the end and the sun. And I coloured the images already, but I coloured them off screen just because of time. But I used my Polychromos pencils, which I have not dragged out for the longest time. And I actually used them on some new to me paper called Canson Bristol. It's very different to Strathmore Bristol paper. So these are the images. I actually cut them out on my Scan and Cut and then coloured them in. I even made the little guy look like Fred. So I added his tie and the little pattern to his little orange outfit, just to try and get that sort of Flintstone-y feel. And made Wilma look like Wilma. So to start with, I've got the little clouds here and I'm using the tumbled glass oxide ink. And I'm going to just ink these up so they've got a little bit of colour. So I thought I would actually use a post-it note to try and hold it in place, but you'll see they eventually pop off. So I just give up on that. And my hand kept sticking to the post-it as well, so it didn't help much. Just a little bit of ink around the edges, just so that they've got a little bit of depth to them, so they're not just stark white. And then just cleaning up my work surface. Then for the sun, I was going to use, and I did use, some fossilized amber, but it wasn't actually dark enough. So I will bring in another colour, which I'll show you in a second. And it made a much bigger difference, I think, to the sun. And you'll see that in a second. I'll bring it in. It just wasn't enough of a contrast to give that sort of sun look. So I used Spice Marmalade as an extra colour to highlight the edges of the sun against the yellow cardstock. So I also think it's a good idea, I've been doing this more and more, is to start with a coloured cardstock and then add some extra depth with your inks or your markers or something like that. It just helps when you're not having to colour the entire piece of cardstock, although I do that a lot anyway. But if you have coloured cardstock, start with that if you want that sort of contrast, and even if you want to get an ombre effect as well, that works really well because it's halfway done for you. So for the sandy bit, because they're in a desert, I am using the Hills and Drifts stencil and just kind of making it work for me. Basically, it's not wide enough for this panel, but I started with the antique linen, and then with oxides I do make sure I've got like a wet or a bit of damp on the cloth, which they desperately need a wash. And then I'm taking the gathered twigs over the top just to give that contrast for the sandy kind of colour, and I love that. I think it looks so nice, those two colours together. And again, just cleaning up as I go, it just makes it easier, especially if I need to use the stencil again, then just clean as you go kind of thing. And then I'm going to turn the stencil over and just, not exact, but just roughly sort of like mask it off, the ground off, so that I can then get some of the sky in. So I'm starting with the tumbled glass, and I'm starting at the top, working towards the ground, so that it gives it, so that it's whiter or lighter or lightest at the sort of horizon. And that way, especially if you're in the, for me, if you're in a desert, if you look at the horizon, there's almost like this white light. It's sort of that very bright, intense kind of light. So for me, that's kind of why I did that as well. It just adds a bit more to the scene. And then I used the broken china just to bring in a little bit of a darker blue, but not a dark blue, but like a darker hue of that blue. And that way it goes from that sort of darker to that almost white light, which I thought was really nice. And then, of course, because it's distress, I've got to spritz it with some water, which I did. And then just mop it up with a paper towel. Again, it's just all texture and interest in the background. You could also leave them to air dry, and they will sort of dry in those colours, but they will have that reaction and it will look different to this sort of, almost like you've pulled the ink off it. So my card base is going to be 7 by 6 inches, scored at 3.5, and it is a mini slimline card. Sometimes I don't show you the folding of the card bases, because I think as long as I tell you what size card base it is, you know, do you really want to see me stick it to a card base? But I will, yeah, sometimes I will do that. So obviously I'll try and remember to tell you what size card base, if it's an unusual size, different for what I would normally use. And then I'm just using some wet adhesive to get that stuck to the front of the card. And I'm going to start putting my scene together. And this is always the fun bit, but I always get a bit stuck sometimes. I have this idea in my head, and then when it comes to actually placing things, I'm a bit like, where do I put everything? So what I now do is I try and place things before I stick anything. So before you commit to doing anything, add your pieces in, so you have an idea of where you want to put them. And so the dino is Dino the dino. And so I tried to get the colouring right for him. He's kind of like a purpley colour. I think he's actually got a blue collar on or something, but I didn't have a collar, so I just went with that. And then you've also got then sort of Fred and Thelma. Is it Thelma? Oh, I forget now. And Wilma. No, Thelma. Oh, I can't remember now. Anyway, and there's a couple of little palm trees and a little rock house, and then the little fire. I mean, just, it's a very simple scene, but it's I don't know, it was fun to make, and I think I like doing these sort of inspired by kind of cards. So I think I've done a few now. The previous video, or one, if it's up, is a How to Train Your Dragon one, so if you want to go and check that out. And I've done Peter Rabbit, but there'll be more coming. I like doing them. They take me back to my childhood a little bit, even though I'm a big kid at heart. So once I decided where I wanted everything to go, I then just sticking them flat with some liquid adhesive. And there was this other little piece that I had die cut and coloured, but I didn't actually know really what it was, other than maybe a pile of rocks. I just didn't know where to put it, so I didn't worry with it. And then getting my sun on, and anything that hangs off the edge I will trim off as well once it's completely done. And I decided to get my sentiment out first, and then still playing with that little thing, so I could work out where I was actually going to stamp before I put those last two clouds on. I thought it was a good idea to get that done first, and then you know, and then I'd have the placement for that, or at least work out where I wanted to put it. So once I worked out where I wanted to put my sentiment, I then could stick the rest of the other clouds, there was more than one, and then I would just quickly stamp that just straight onto the card. So not always, you don't always have to have like a separate sentiment strip, you know, a separate piece of cardstock for your sentiment strip. You can just stamp it straight on if there's a natural place for it to go. Sometimes sentiment strips can make it more difficult to find a natural spot for it. But yeah. So just put an acrylic block on there just for a second or two, just so that it could, the glue could set nicely and flat. And then I will take some big big scissors, and trim off the edges of anything hanging off the edge. And I also think that adds to the scene. It makes it look more like a proper scene. I don't know why, if you've got bits hanging off the edge. And there you go, guys. It's very simple. I know I didn't do the colouring on the video, but it's very easy colouring. The dinosaur actually needs more work, but we'll worry about that. I haven't dug those things out for ages. But I hope this inspires you to take some of your crafty stamps and dies and to create something from your childhood that inspires you. Bye for now.